Welcome to the Evolution of AloHā podcast with me, Dr. Jerry Ibalarosa Tanel. Now let's talk story. All right. Welcome everyone to the Evolution of AloHā podcast, a Plowline production. I am your host, Dr. Jerry Ibalarosa Tanel. Gosh, I can't even say my own name. So today we'll be talking with Mindy Woods, community organizer in Edmonds, Washington, and housing homeless advocate. But before we get started, one of the first things I'd like to do is honor the land in which our feet stand. And I will begin by acknowledging that those of us who are gathering in the Seattle, Washington area north, we are on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial. We respect this place and honor the sacred spiritual connection to the land, water, and its people, past, present, and future. And by acknowledging these lands and their original indigenous inhabitants, we reach back to our own indigenous roots and reflect on the impacts of colonialism and the lands from which all our people come. We're connected to our ancestors through this connection to land, for the land is what connects us all. It is also critical to acknowledge that this country would not exist if it wasn't for the free enslaved labor of Black people and the contributions of Chinese railroad workers in helping complete the most important construction project in the mid-19th century America. And to add to the mix of acknowledgement that our country has failed to do, I'd like to also honor the Filipino Manongs who played a significant role in building the farm workers movement in the 1920s and 30s, organizing and striking alongside Mexican immigrants, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. It is critical for us to honor the legacy of the African, Asian, Indigenous, and Native diaspora, and the knowledge to care for these lands and the skills to build the America we share today. So please join me in taking a moment to honor the land of the traditional people in the territory in which you stand. Today, I honor the Tulalip tribes and allied bands for their enduring care and the protection of this land. And I also honor the life and labor of the Black, Asian, Native, and Indigenous communities by expressing my deepest respect and gratitude. So thank you so much for being here, Mindy. It's amazing hearing your stories on being a housing and homeless advocate. I read your post on how you were actually houseless before.
Right. Yeah. The post that you saw that week of May 7th through, that whole week, that first week of May has so many significant milestones for me. May 7th of 2011, my then 13-year-old son and I lost our home, our apartment in Linwood due to black mold. Black mold was taking over really the whole building. And we were both very, very ill, had secondary black mold poisoning. And my son ended up in Children's Hospital for 4 days with fungus growing in his esophagus. Oh. And he also has type 1 diabetes. So it was making him very, very ill. Anytime you have illness with a metabolic disorder, an endocrine disorder like that, it can really exacerbate everything. And so when we got out of the hospital and came back to the apartment, the mold just had exploded through the drywall everywhere. Every wall had mold on it. And that is when we recognized that we had secondary black mold poisoning. So we had to evacuate, essentially. We were getting no help from anybody. I was a very angry mama bear, and I contacted everybody and any organization I could find, including the American Lung Association, the EPA, the head of HUD, Housing and Urban and Development, everybody. I did get a couple of inspectors to come out and said, yes, you have mold, but we don't do anything about that. That's where you need to follow through with other channels. So it was just evident to me that it was in our best interest and for the safety and health and well-being for my child, that I needed to get him out of there. And we had nowhere to go. So we ended up staying with a friend over the weekend. It was actually my son's soccer coach's mom, and she lived in a 55 plus mobile home park out in unincorporated Bothell area. I was too embarrassed and ashamed and humiliated to let my inner circle of friends know what was going on. So I kind of reached out to people on the peripheral edge of our social network. And so we stayed there for the weekend. And on that Monday morning on May 9th, I thought, I'm going to drop my son off at school and I'm going to find us housing by the end of the day, or a shelter. So I pulled up in front of Briar Terrace Middle School in the Edmond School District, dropped him off, said, no worries, mom's going to have a place by the end of the day. So you have a great day at school, do your best, work hard. And I drove around to the back of the school and parked in the farthest parking spot away from the building under a tree and lowered my seat so nobody would see me, because I didn't have the money to go driving back to Bothell and then back again, in 7 hours. And I just thought, naively, I'm just going to call a couple of phone numbers and they're going to need me to be in the area so I can just drive right on over and sign leases or whatever I needed to do. And I pulled out my flip phone with my prepaid cell phone minutes on it. And I had to budget the minutes. So I had to make sure I was strategically calling places that I thought had the best chances of helping us. And the first thing I thought of was I had worked as a campfire leader years before for low income complexes. And I was also the leader at the only shelter in all of South County, which is the YWCA shelter in Linwood called Pathways for Women. And I thought, that's who can help us. So I called them first and nobody answered. They had a voicemail. So I left a message. So I just sat there waiting. I thought, any minute now they're going to call me. And half an hour went by and I started to panic. So then I remembered that somebody had told me somewhere I had heard about 211 as the free community resource line. So I called 211. Now, again, this was May 9th. So, 9 days into the month. And 211 told me they didn't know of any organization that had money left for a motel voucher. And they didn't know of any shelters that had beds or rooms available for us. And I was just stunned. By the 9th of the month, everybody's out of money already. What do people do for the rest of the month? And I was about to find out. And so I had a legal pad of paper in the car with me, and I just started writing down phone numbers. And each number that I called, I would ask, who else do you suggest that I call? So that I had a tally, and I was making sure again that I was calling numbers that had the best chance of getting through, because my cell minutes were running out. And I was so sick at that point, and I already had autoimmune illnesses that I was struggling with. So I was unable to work. So I did house and pet sitting as to make ends meet. I had applied for Social Security disability, but had been denied, because that's what the government is really good at doing. They hope to outweight you. And, but I, so I was just kind of pulling dollars together any way I could. And and that's how I had met my son's soccer coach's mom. She actually was the next door neighbor for one of our pet sitting clients. And so I just was thinking, gosh, I don't have any pet sitting gigs lined up for a little bit, for at least for a few weeks. If I could just get to that point, we would be okay. Right. And then it would be at the beginning of June. So maybe then organizations would have money again. So I contacted another friend that we knew through an organization through my son's type 1 diabetes. We were part of another group. And so I called some friends and they said, sure, we have a futon downstairs in the basement and it sleeps two. You and your son can stay with us in the interim period until you figure something else out. So by the time school got out, I got right back in the pickup line and picked my son up, and he said, okay, where are we going? And it took everything in me to make it sound like an adventure, or we're going to go stay with friends and we're going to, have fun. And we did this little dance for 3 weeks. And we finally got a call back from the YWCA sometime later that week. And they said, no problem. Yes, we can certainly help you. How about August 17th?
And this is June.
This was May.
Oh, this is May. Yeah.
4-month wait list. 4-month wait list. And that was for women and women with children. And that is the only shelter in all of South Snohomish County. And no other shelter had space. No other organization called me back even. I had 52 different phone numbers listed that I'd left messages for or had contacted on that legal pad of paper. And that shelter was the only shelter that called us back, but the appointment was not for 4 months. So we spent 4 months between the 55 plus mobile home park with my son's soccer coach's mom, and then our other friends out in Ballard. We could only do 1 week at a time at each place. And in between, we had some pet sitting gigs lined up. So we would do that. And then we'd go back and we'd alternate back and forth. And this is what we did for 4 months. And there was a night, I would also try to arrange for my son to have as many sleepovers as possible with friends during the summertime to try to keep some semblance of normalcy for him. He's 13, just hitting those teen years, middle school. It was already, embarrassing enough for both of us. I don't think he admitted to any of his friends what was going on either. So I really wanted to try to make life feel as normal as possible. So when we were getting close to that August appointment date, I actually had one last pet sitting gig lined up, and it was ending on August 10th. And I actually had been told by my son's soccer coach's mom that the mobile home park people had reported that we had been staying there too many times. And not that we did anything wrong, it's just against their rules, right? And so she actually let us know that we weren't allowed to come back there, at least not for a while. And our other friends in Ballard, were so far out that the drive was eating up all my gas. And I just felt like we were imposing on them too, because they had a 3-year-old and they were a small little family, and here's 2 more mouths to feed. So I was really starting to panic and trying to think of where else could we go? Was there a camping trip we could even do? Anything to just try to not impose on other people. And I got a call on August 9th from the YWCA, and they said, actually, we've had an opening come up, and so we're going to move your appointment up by a week. So the appointment was going to be the next day, the day that my last pet sitting gig ended. So that all lined up beautifully. And when I got to the appointment, I thought we would be put up into the shelter, and they let me know that because my son was 13, and the way the shelter is set up, you share a kitchen with one neighbor and her child or children, and then you share a bathroom on your other side. And so there's kind of access on both sides. You can lock your door on your internal, but there's still access to go through to the other side if their doors were unlocked. And their policy was not to have 13-year-old boys or teen boys, minor boys, mixed with the other neighbors that had little girls. And I understood that, but I was just crushed. And so they couldn't put us in the shelter. So what they did instead is they put us in a motel for 6 weeks. So we stayed on a motel on Highway 99 for 6 weeks, which took us into the beginning of school starting. And, and again, I tried to make it feel like we were on a permanent, an extended vacation. We each had a bed, we had laundry services, housekeeping would come in, and we had a little TV and a little refrigerator, and we'd go stock the refrigerator, and we had a little microwave. And I just tried to make it feel like this was a mini vacation. And so we'd go on little adventures in the neighborhood, or, that kind of thing. The interurban trail went behind us. So anyway, I did my best that I could, but again, we still hadn't told anybody else. And we were leaving for school one morning at 6:50 in the morning, which is fairly early to be up. And so we shut the door behind us, and I heard a door shut about 4 doors down. And we turned and looked and ran straight into my son, one of my son's best friends, and his dad.
Oh.
They were also staying there. And we all kind of stopped and froze, kind of like deer caught in the headlights. And I just said, "Hi, what are you doing here?" And he said that his wife had been having massive seizures, some kind of undiagnosed medical condition, Because of it, she lost her job. And because they were down to one income, they were not able to maintain the house payments. And so they lost their house. And so they too were living in the motel with two boys. And that is the day that I realized that homelessness can happen to anybody at any time for any reason. It doesn't discriminate, and nobody is immune. And even those who try to tell me, oh, well, I'm financially secure. And I said, you're the prime target for identity theft. And when that happens, your accounts are frozen. You don't have that access. So your quality of life as you know it stops. And you are then in the position of trying to figure out, how do you even meet your basic needs, food and shelter and medication. In my son's case, with diabetes, and he needed insulin. He had to have insulin every day, every time he ate. So we drove around in our car with our 2 packed suitcases in the trunk. My son's pet newt, he had in a little carrier tank that would be down on the floorboard between his feet or on his lap. And then a big bag full of diabetes supplies with his needles, his blood sugar testing kit, his test strips, and snacks for when his blood sugar dropped, but also his insulin, which has to be refrigerated. So I was constantly thinking, I have to find a place to have my son's insulin refrigerated. So that's why I was always making sure that he had someplace to stay. Even if I didn't know where I was going to be able to stay, I needed to make sure that the people he was staying with, they all knew, his friends' parents all knew he had diabetes, and they all knew that his insulin needed to go in the refrigerator. I kind of had a great little network to support us through that. And so I knew he was taken care of in that way. But I do remember one night, I didn't know where I was going to stay. And I was driving around trying to find the safest place for myself to be in my car, but without being out in the open and not being a target of police or prying eyes, reporting me for any reason. And so I found myself in a park in Mount Lake Terrace. And at first I parked under the street light. And then I thought, no, that's too much out in the open. So I backed up a few spots. So I was kind of in between the darker spot and the light. And I just remember texting friends like, hey, is it possible that I could, crash at your place tonight? We're in transition and our apartment's being remodeled. And I just still couldn't tell anybody. And I had a friend that finally responded at almost midnight that night. And so I happened to be close to her neighborhood. So I was able to go over and just sleep on a couch at her place. But when I got to that point that morning where I ran into my son's friend's dad in the hallway, that's the day I said, you know what, I can't do this by myself and we need help. And it's really important. And my job as a parent is to protect my child and provide for him and support him and give him all the tools that he needs to be successful. And I wasn't able to even get him an ASB card at school, which were $5. Like that $5 needed to go in that gas tank because we were driving back and forth from clear out in Ballard or way out by Mill Creek. And so that's the day I went into school. I parked in the front and I went in with him and I kissed him and sent him off to class. And then I went into the office and I knew the office staff, but I was whispering, we don't have a place to stay. We've lost our apartment. She goes, oh, no problem. We have our homeless liaison in her office. Let me call her and you can just go on in. And I just remember feeling shocked that there was enough need, that there was an actual homeless liaison employed by the school, by the Edmonds school district at this school. And she goes, oh, there's one in every school. I just was floored. So that's when I really opened my eyes, and then understanding and talking with that liaison on what services were available, what shelters were in the county, who did what organizations were helping families or individuals. So that's how I got involved. So that anniversary was May 7th. May 6th was the day, or excuse me, May 2nd was the day that I got the apartment that I live in now. And we had experienced homelessness the second time. And so that was the day that I came out of homelessness. May 6th was the day that the city of Edmonds hired me as their first human services employee. and position that I advocated for 3 years prior, because of my own experiences through homelessness and just other resources that we needed to support us, mental health and healthcare access. And my son actually had gone through a bout of substance use disorder and was involved with the Juvenile Justice Center, called Denny, up in Snohomish County, up in Everett. So we had gone through a lot of different things through a pretty short period of time. And so people started to know me as an advocate and an organizer in the community and somebody who knew about these resources. And so I started getting tagged on social media or called, or somebody would refer me and I'd get a random phone call from somebody. And so it started happening pretty frequently. And so I started going down to city council and saying, and hey, you've got 42,000 people living in the city. There are people struggling and they're calling me as a private resident. You should create something to help your residents that live here. Just because we live, in a beautiful location by the water, and there is a lot of wealth in this city, but there's also a lot of other people that are struggling in a variety of different ways, not to mention, economically as well. And that's kind of after, after the recovery of the recession, and jobs were coming back online and people were starting to do better. But it's also when rents started going up, the housing market started getting really hot. So people were starting to really get down to that one paycheck away from some kind of financial crisis happening. And they were right on the edge of that financial cliff, as well as mental health issues, domestic violence issues, just different things. People started calling me about all these things. So the city of Edmonds, after I testified at city council 3 times and had I organized others to come and tell their stories as well, other people I knew about that had gone through different things in the community. So we really started a little movement, and January of 2020, city council approved the first human services position, and they called it human services program manager at 20 hours a week. They thought, well, let's just we'll just give it a half time and we'll just see if there's actually any need. Again, January 2020, 1 month later, in Snohomish County was the first case of COVID in the country.
Yeah.
And then it just started to spread like wildfire. And they posted the position online, and I could qualify for all of it except for the 4-year degree that they wanted. And they started calling me going, why are you not applying? And I said, because you made it inequitable. They said, what do you mean? And I said, I, again, was a single mom with a child with special medical needs. I myself was struggling with autoimmune disorders and was unable to work. And then we went through the whole situation with the mold and all the other issues, and then being unhoused. I didn't have the time, energy, or money to go get a 4-year degree. I was too busy trying to survive, trying to access resources, trying to get us back on our own 2 feet, and trying to help my child through all of this.
Right.
And they're like, oh, okay, well, what if we change it to 4-year degree or lived experience and volunteerism? Yes. So they rewrote it. The next day I applied, and 20 minutes after I sent the application in and the resume, I got an invite to interview the following day. I also had COVID during that time. So I was also recognizing on the health challenges of people experiencing COVID or any other health challenge, trying to find appointments and trying to find tests and trying to find, access to healthcare or rides to those appointments. Like my job kind of started before I was even hired, right? And I went through the interviews and I got hired on May 6th. And that was one day after I got out of quarantine. So I, for the first time was getting dressed, in 6 weeks I'd been in quarantine, because back then we didn't know.
Right.
You still weren't contagious, even though you might still have some symptoms. And so I got all dressed and went down to City Hall. And before I even signed new hire paperwork, they handed me a piece of paper with 15 names and numbers of people calling for help for a variety of things, because they heard that the city, was announced in the press that the city had a human services division. If that doesn't tell you that mentality of, well, if I'm not struggling, then there isn't, people struggling in my city, right? As elected officials, or we have a lot of wealth in our city, so therefore everybody must be doing well, right? Just all the different, the elitism is what I'll just say, right? And just right away. And I remember the mayor standing there and then my new director and getting this piece of paper. And I said, should I sign my name on something first? Should I, declare that I actually work here first so that I can get paid for this? And they said, so I did that paperwork and they immediately said, please create a program. We've got to get money out to people to start stabilizing folks where they're at. And I have been running, with feet on fire ever since. So that same week was those 3 different anniversaries, but then also that week is when my job actually went full-time. So almost 2 years to the day, my job went full-time because that's how much need there is in our community. So I am the first human services program manager for the city of Edmonds, in a position that I advocated for 4 years prior.
That the story. I mean, I have just goosebumps listening to your story. There is so much stigma around people that are houseless,
Mhm.
and some of them are so horrible. The stereotypes, right? It's like, well, it's their fault. It's a drug addiction. It's alcoholism. It's that they were in prison. And there are all of these. I remember I was on social media having a conversation with people in Bothell that was making comments about a man who was homeless. And they were saying, oh yeah, you could tell he was in prison. Those shoes are prison shoes. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And don't give him money, because you know what he's going to do is he's just going to go ahead and he's going to buy drugs. And I'm thinking, every single thought that comes to your mind to not look at the humanity of that individual is right there in front of you to stop you from giving some kind of help.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, it's amazing. And it's I always look at AloHā. That's the way that I live. And you advocating for yourself and now advocating for other people in light of everything that you went through, that is the AloHā spirit, Mindy, that you have within you. And you share that so beautifully with other individuals. And it's like when I read your story, I'm like, this is the AloHā that we need to be sharing. This is the AloHā that we need to talk about. Is that even as you're telling your story, I'm sure that there were moments in between where you were pissed off.
Oh, yes. Yes. I remember one day pulling over after we stayed in that motel for 6 weeks. And then the YWCA had a room for us, a shelter room for us. And we moved into the shelter, and we were there for 3.5 months before we finally got our apartment in Edmonds. And ironically, it was an apartment that the actual unit I had actually toured 4 years prior, when a previous neighbor of mine was trying to get out because she was recognizing mold situation as well. And her little one had to be, had stopped breathing one day and had to be ambulanced to Children's. So that's kind of when I recognized this whole mold issue. But anyway, she said, would you want to go and check out an apartment with me? So I did. And it happened to be that same unit. So flash forward 4 years, and I'm sitting in a leasing office signing a lease. This was all part of a program that the YWCA had a contract with this apartment complex. I had no choice in anything other than I was ready to move. And yes, this was a complex I was wanting to live in. And so I got done with all the paperwork and I said, okay, she handed me the keys. And I said, so where is the unit? And she goes, oh, it's right there across the parking lot. And I said, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, and I said, which one? She goes, the one on the top on the middle. or in the middle on the top. And I went, oh my gosh, that is the very unit I had walked through 4 years prior and loved and thought I would never be able to afford this unit. And here I was in this transitional apartment, this program, getting into this apartment. And we lived in that apartment for 3.5 years. And then again, the rug was pulled out from underneath us. The landlord decided to no longer be part of that transitional apartment or transitional program anymore, ended the contract, and then was systematically evicting or not renewing the leases of the 13 moms with their kids that were part of this program. And we were the last ones. And we had a Section 8 voucher at that point, which was a federally subsidized rental assistance voucher. I was on Social Security disability at that point. So the voucher would pay 1/3, or I would pay 1/3 of the rent, and the voucher would cover the other 2/3. And it was no more than 1/3 of my Social Security income. And that's what the Fair Housing Act of 1965 says, that affordable housing, nobody should be paying more than 30% of their housing, whether it's rental or mortgage, plus your utilities, your power, your electricity. And that way, that's something that's reasonable that people can then, afford to eat, afford your medication, afford to fuel your vehicle or transportation, whatever, however your mode of transportation. And so anyway, at that point, the state law at that time was a 20-day written notice. And so on August 10th, I got the 20-day written notice from the landlord that she would not be renewing our lease. So we had 20 days during August to find another place to live. And we could not find another landlord to accept our Section 8 voucher that had an availability anywhere. Ironically, at that same time, I had gotten into advocacy, and I was involved with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, and I had been a frequent testifier during legislative session on a number of bills that had to do with housing or homeless protections or tenant protections. And one of the bills we were working on was called source of income discrimination. And it was where landlords were discriminating against tenants who paid their rent with Section 8 vouchers or Social Security, child support, or even a pension. And in all of those different forms, that discriminatory practice was disproportionately affecting people of color, and specifically women of color. And so we had really been fighting for this ban on this discriminatory practice for several years. And I had been testifying on this, and I had actually worked with a number of elected officials on this. And then here it was essentially happening to me, because that was her reasoning for not renewing my lease. I'm not accepting Section 8 voucher. No, it wasn't. It was that she wasn't accepting my Section 8 voucher. Right. And so we could not find another place to live by Labor Day weekend. And of course, then everybody's gone too, taken off for the summer or that weekend. And so we had to put our last of our possessions into storage. And at that point, my son was 18. We couldn't get back into the shelter because he was no longer a minor. He was going into his senior year of high school. And I just wanted to give him stability. I mean, here we were going through this a second time. It took 3 years for him to recover from the first time. So at that point, I made the gut-wrenching decision to give him stability, and I placed him with a family friend who also had a son in his senior year. And that way, Darian could have his own bedroom, stability, go to school with his friend, and not have to worry about bouncing around. And then I embarked on another 8-month journey of 4 different houses, 4 different couches, and 1 den couch, and 3 individual couches for 8 months before I got into this apartment. But finding, understanding that these situations where the more I started advocating, the more I was meeting other people who were going through similar situations. But the variety of stories, I mean, so many different stories. When you talk about, this misperception of that people have, that the public has.
Mhm.
You'll hear the term NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Mm.
And we are YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, because we are a community. And that thought that because somebody else, regardless of how they got unhoused, if they've gone through the incarceration system, their slate's clean, right? They've done it. There was a sentence, they did the time, and they were released. We as a society are supposed to then accept them as, here's your new chance, right?
Yep.
But if we're blocking them from even having a roof over their head,
Yep.
or even more, a job, because it's on those applications, right? We're just perpetuating the
It's a revolving door.
Absolutely. If it's somebody who's having substance use disorder, guess what? That's a medical situation. It's a medical condition. I would think in the last 2 years with COVID and people choosing not to mask and choosing not to vaccinate, but then when they would get sick, they got medical care.
Right.
Nobody closed the doors and said, nope, sorry, you're out on your own, right? They got the medical care, the treatment that they needed to help them get back on their own 2 feet. Same thing with somebody in substance use disorder. And now that I'm a mom of a son who's gone through that, as well as I'm a sister of two sisters that have gone through substance use disorder. When you can see somebody for their humanity and recognize that they are struggling, and that there was, especially when we're talking about substance use, there was a hurt or a trauma that happened.
Yes.
Right. And we go back to that root. And we love that person and meet them where they're at, and then support them and help walk them beside them through into recovery. It makes the world of difference. But when we are throwing people away and we are as a society saying, for whatever reason, you are less than and not worthy of, what does that say about us?
Exactly. What does that say about us? The individuals that are actually making these judgments.
Yeah. And even more so, to go a step further, since this is every year is an election year, but here we are in Washington state, our entire House of Representatives, all seats are up, and half the Senate. So voting matters, right? Because we're very much involved in civic engagement and using our voices to create change. That also means that who we vote for, the A, that we should be voting, and then B, who we vote for, who is representing us at these different elected levels, who are either sharing our values, that we are in community and that each person matters and each person has a voice and each person has equal rights to the same protections as the next person, or we're voting in people who are also saying those same things that you were just describing. They've made poor choices. They should have done this. They obviously, want to be outside. I just was watching the news this morning. No, they don't. Nobody wants to. Maybe a few people who are done with society and they want to go be off the grid. That is not who we're talking about.
Right.
That is not who we're talking about.
Right.
Everybody deserves the safety and the privacy and the dignity and the comfort of a safe, stable, healthy place to call home. And like air, food, and water, housing is a basic necessity. It's what allows us to live up to our full potential and thrive and dream and move forward in our lives. But when when I look at my son and I see that because I fought for him and I stood by him and I created those healthy boundaries. Also, I did not enable, but I created healthy boundaries, but I got him the help that he needed and stood by him and caught him when he fell and lifted him back up and caught him again when he fell and lifted him back up and didn't quit. He now is a 25-year-old that is holding down 2 jobs and has his own place and has his own car and is, giving back to the community And he says all the time, Mom, if I didn't have you. And he talks about other friends that didn't have the same support system.
Yeah.
And that's the same for people going through houselessness. If we're just throwing people away and treating them like garbage and stop even looking at them in the eye,
Yeah.
what is the incentive for somebody to want to get back in with society again? I mean, when you are, my biggest fear for folks is, it's one thing when you're houseless, but when you are hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my thing. That is, if anything, I think, that's even my Twitter handle is Hope Dealer. Like, we have to continue to provide hope to people. And I may not have the answers to something, and I may not have the ability to help somebody, but I can at least acknowledge their humanity.
What kept you, what kept you going? What was the drive? Even in those moments, like, it's like having someone tell you that your son's 13, so sorry, you can't come here. What kept you going?
Honestly, it was my faith. It was my faith in my Creator. My mom passed 26 years ago. I don't have other family here. I'm a veteran of the Persian Gulf War. And I just, all these things, I was like, so veterans can't get into shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Single moms can't get into shelter, moms in general, children with medical needs can't get into shelter. All these different things. And I'm thinking, and I know that I'm somebody who's resourceful and will speak up when I can get out of my own way, when I'm not too ashamed, I will ask for help, and then I will, network and try to find resources. But I kept thinking, well, what about the person that can't speak up, can't ask for help for whatever reason? Maybe it's a domestic violence situation and they're too afraid of their name being anywhere found, right? Maybe it's somebody who's undocumented. Maybe it's, just somebody just has way too much pride. A lot of our older community members, that generation has a very hard time asking for help. Very, very hard time. So whatever the reason, I just kept thinking, there is a reason that I'm being put through this. I don't know what that reason is. One day I believed then that one day it would be revealed to me why I was being put through that. Now I know, but back then I just had to trust the process. I just had to trust the process. I am so grateful that, like I said, I didn't tell my inner circle, my closest friends, but those that I wasn't even that close with opened their doors to us and took us in and didn't judge, didn't, put conditions on things. They just, yes, come, we will help you. And I have seen that time and time and time again. Yes, there's that real ugly side with all the judgment and the criticism, but there's also a lot of great community out there, that AloHā spirit, right? I have seen, even on my local city has an Edmond's Moms Facebook page. Every single time I see somebody say, maybe they don't know about me, right? And they'll say, I'm about to lose my apartment and I'm this much short on my rent. I hate asking, I'm so embarrassed, but is there anybody that can, help me with a little bit? Or food. I saw one last week, a couple with a little one, and the husband had hurt himself and wasn't getting income. And she had just started a new job, but didn't have that first paycheck yet. And they just needed a week's worth of food. To see how many people jumped in and they had more than enough, right? That's the kind of thing that just kept me going, where I was like, okay, this is a really crappy scenario, but clearly I'm not the only one. We are not the only ones. And for some reason, I'm being put through this, and I'm going to trust that something good is going to come out of this. But in the meantime, I'm going to honor and celebrate all of the community that is wrapping their arms around us and taking us in. including that YWCA that I worked for 8 years prior.
Right.
Here we were now as a client, and it gave me a better understanding of, what the children were feeling 8 years prior when I was their campfire leader.
Yep. One of the things that you mentioned, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, so you're a veteran. So am I, right? I think that was one of the other things that we
Was
had
one of
in
the things that drew
common.
us together.
Yes, that we both served in the Navy.
Yeah.
And here we are women serving our country.
Yep.
And our country looked at us and like,
Yep.
not worthy of serving us after what we did for our country, which can be so frustrating.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, 2009, during the recession, my husband and I was living in Bellingham, and we had a business that we needed to shut down because a recession was going to hit, and we were going to lose our business. So we packed up, and I don't share this story very often, but I think it's apropos for what we're talking about right now. We took everything that we owned in the house and took it to an auction house to sell it. We returned our truck to the bank and just left the keys and said, we can't make payments anymore. Here's the truck. And we gathered enough money to buy a smaller truck and a teardrop trailer. And we packed up our 2 dogs, whatever we could in the back of our truck, and we hit the road. And it was one of the hardest things to think that that we didn't have a house, that we were houseless. And there was this moment where I wanted to make it an adventure as well too. We're going to go on a road trip. We're going to, because it helped me move throughout my day. And, it's like we both went on unemployment, but unemployment ran out really quick. And I remember we were down over in Joshua Tree and we couldn't afford to go anywhere else. We scraped up whatever quarters, sold whatever things that we had, pawn shop stuff, whatever we could to get quarters so we could shower. And it was like, oh my goodness. But I remember on the way down, we pretty much was telling people, all right, we're going to go on a road and we're going on a trip. And my daughter-in-law at that time was pregnant with our grandson. And I was like, how am I'm leaving. I'm leaving my son and my daughter-in-law. My grandson is going to be coming here and his grandmother doesn't have a place for him to play. And we were driving south. We ended up over at the gates of Yosemite. That was the first place that we went. And I was just depressed. I was depressed and I was like, I can't believe this. We don't know where we're going to sleep next. And we don't know when the next meal is going to come. And I was sick. I was really sick. I actually had to have a nephrectomy. So I had to remove my right kidney. But I couldn't at that time because we weren't working. We didn't have any insurance. Insurance wasn't going to help us. The kind of, when we went in, and I remember going down to a hospital over in Kirkland, and they're looking at me like, why are you even trying to come here? Sorry, we can't help you, right? Kind of thing. And they had me sitting in the waiting room like for hours and treated me like I was like I was nothing. And my husband and I left and we were like, all right, we're just going to do the best that we can. While we were on the road, I wrote a letter to my sons and my unborn grandson, just pretty much telling them that this is life without me. And, I hope you all have a great life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, because I was just so sick. I was so sick. And when we were heading to Yosemite and I was feeling all of these emotions, these really big emotions, my husband said, hey, you know what, just look up. And I'm like, you know what, I'm tired of looking up. There is nothing to look up for. We're homeless and we're poor and we have no I didn't have any education. And it's like, I don't know what our life's going to be like. He's like, no, 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 seriously, look up. And when we looked up, El Capitan, it was just right around sunset and the waterfall was coming down and it looked like it was on fire.
Ooh.
And I kind of was like, wow. And at that moment, I realized on how much greater our God was,
Mm-hmm.
and I really leaned on my faith at that time. And we were out on the road for probably about 4 months, and we landed back here in Bothell from Bellingham. We got a job in retail, paying like $9 an hour, and we found ourselves. We lived with some friends, which ended up. You think people are your friends until you find yourself in a situation where you need just a little bit more. And when they're not willing to give, they make you feel like you're nothing, kind of like a throwaway, right? So we exited and we found ourselves our own place and lived in our car for a little while. And when we found a place, we were there for probably about a year or two. Yeah, because that was 2009. So 2011. And then it hit again, a second time. The water, we had a flooding in the house that flooded down into the house below. We needed to move out. My mother passed away at that time.
Wow.
And I was getting even more sick, but now I had medical. I was getting ready to have surgery, and we had to move out of our place in the middle of all of this, going back home, burying my mom, being sick. My son was incarcerated, and he just came out. And during all that time, trying to deal with all of this and wanting him to know, and me knowing that the only way that he's going to get past this is knowing that he has his family.
Yeah.
So wanting to give him that stability, and going down to down to where he was in prison, seeing him every weekend, not, and trying to scrape up as much money as I could, because I didn't want to have a weekend where he wasn't going to see his mom. And then him coming to live with us and everything, just like, I'm like, oh my gosh. So from 2009 all the way to 2012, after I had my surgery, it was a hard time. It was a hard time. And at that time, I was finishing up my bachelor's degree. And I'm like, I'm going to get into my master's degree. And then it's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I became that person that would be looking at systems of inequity.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that the deeper I got into it and finding myself in it, on how inequitable our systems are.
Yeah.
And then realizing as well, too, that wait a minute, if you look at it, these systems that I feel is broken is not broken. It is doing exactly what the system is built to do.
Yep. Exactly.
And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, that is just absolutely fucked up in all kinds of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, you have to have power and privilege in order to work in these societies that is going to work for only certain people and not everyone.
Yep.
And I'm like, where is the humanity in that?
Exactly. Blows your mind when you start seeing, like you said, people say the system's broken. Mm-mm. No, they're designed this way.
Mm-hmm.
Designed this way.
Yeah.
So when you ask me, where did I find the strength? My faith in God. But number two, when I looked at that sweet boy's face,
yeah,
my job, I already felt like I had failed as a parent in keeping the roof over our head, right?
Yeah.
I was not going to let him be without a mom, number one. So I had those dark days too. Oh, I had lots of dark days. And again, I was sick too. I had multiple autoimmune diseases at that time. And of course, all that stress was just making everything flare. So I felt like I just felt horrible every day. But I had to fight for him. There had to be something better than what we were going through. And I was going to find it. And I was going to fight like hell. And I'd already been a veteran and I already fought for this damn country, but I was going to fight for my kid, right? There was just no ifs, ands, or buts about that, right? But then I kept thinking about all of those people, you know, that friend of his down the hall in the motel, like those who didn't have a voice. They were too sick to use their voice, or they didn't have the mental bandwidth to use their voice yet. They were still in the survival mode. They couldn't speak out yet. Or people of color who had given up on trying to speak up, right? And so all those things, and I also was thinking about my ancestors. And like I had shared with you, you know, I'm Kikialis, and my mom is gone. My link to my whole native side of my family is gone. Her mom is gone. Her aunt is gone. You know, her brother just passed in December. So really thinking about, what did they go through to give me the opportunity to be here today, to even experience being houseless? I can't even imagine, but I know it was a hell of a lot more than what I'm going through right now. And they forged forward. They bonded together. They linked arms with one another as community, and they shared resources, and they supported one another, and they lifted each other up, and they pushed when somebody couldn't walk, and they pulled when, you know, they dragged, whatever they needed to do. And that's where I just kept thinking about that. I kept thinking about my mom being diagnosed with lung cancer metastasized to the brain with 8 brain tumors and given 2 months to live. And that diagnosis came 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for the Persian Gulf War. And I couldn't get out. And the surgeon came in the hospital room, and said, "Who's the one that's in the military? I need to talk to you out in the hallway." Well, of course, everybody in the room, there was like 16 people in the room. All of us just had gathered and gotten this news that she had 8 weeks to live. And so I stepped out in the hallway with the surgeon, and he left the door open. And so my mom could hear. And he's like, "I don't know what you do. You go AWOL or whatever you need to do, but you need to get out because she's not going to be here much longer." And then he walked off. And literally my ship was leaving in 2 weeks. I'd already flown home. They pulled me out of a training class to get me home from San Diego, just to be here for the diagnosis for this biopsy. And my mom kicked everybody out of the room, and she had me get out a piece of paper and a pen, and she had me write down all the things that she wanted to see accomplished before she would even entertain the idea of leaving this earth. And the last thing on the list was to see my little sister get her GED and some kind of training certificate, something, but get my little sister stabilized. She had been struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. And then my mom said, "An asterisk, my birthday." Her birthday was December 13th. She goes, "Oh, wait, 2 asterisks. Let me get to Christmas. Three asterisks. Let me just get to New Year's. Let me see the ball drop, get a kiss, and I'll just go to sleep and I'll be done." I'm like, okay. So I don't remember anything else from that list, just those last, my sister, and those last little asterisks for herself. And she said, "And I need to tell you," she goes, "you are not going to alter your life one bit for what that doctor has just told you, because that doctor is not God. That doctor does not put an expiration date on me. Only God does. Whatever time I have left, that is not for any of us to know at this time, but you will not alter your life for me. You committed to the military. You're going to go. And I'm going to do my damnedest to be here when you're done." So I don't even know where that list is. I just remember those things. And I just remember I had to say goodbye and say our final goodbyes just in case, and leave and go back down to Long Beach. And then we got on board ship and we left. 3 days out from the California coast, our crankshaft broke on our ship. We were dead in the water, no power, nothing. We also floated into the eye of a typhoon. So we were being tossed around in the Pacific Ocean in this typhoon. And then we had a spinal meningitis case on board ship. And we needed to get him off the ship and back to the mainland right away to the hospital. We did a SOS call, and ships from other countries, even everybody came and surrounded us, but we're all in this typhoon, but they had power so they could handle it. We could not. Everybody on board our ship got sick. We had 1,100 people on our ship. Everybody was seasick. It was just horrible. 3 whole days of just being tossed around in these horrendous waves. It got to the point where they were running out of saline solution because so many people were dehydrated and they were IVing people. I don't know anybody that didn't get at least 1 round of IV fluids. It got to the point that those that were the most sick stayed in bed and were hooked up to IVs, but those that could still work, they handed out hefty garbage bags with the handles. And we would put the handle over our neck, over our head, and we would sit with our bag open, and we would just get sick and keep working, and get sick and keep working, and try to get some fluids in. They were just passing out, 7-Up and whatever that had gotten flat, anything to keep our blood sugar up and just keep going. But we were down to such a small crew to operate what we could. I was an operations specialist, so I worked in the Combat Information Center up by the bridge with the captain, and we were on the radars looking at air, surface, and subsurface contacts. So we kind of couldn't just abandon and go lay down. We had to keep watch. And I just remember thinking, my mom is fighting for her life back at home. Am I even going to get out of this alive? And I just remember again, that calming sense of my faith is going to hold me together, and I'm going to see my mom. I don't know how, but I'm going to see her. And on the 3rd day, the USNS ship, the Mercy, came out of Honolulu, got to us, and were able to hook a tow onto us. While they were doing that, a helicopter from another ship, I don't remember what country it was from, was able to land on board and get our spinal meningitis case off, and helicoptered him back to their ship, and then got him to the mainland, where we're Facebook friends today. He survived, and we got towed to Hawaii, and we were stuck in Hawaii for 3 weeks because the parts that we needed had to be ordered and shipped from Japan. During that 3-week time, my mom and her fiance, my dad and his wife, all belonged to a golfing group together. And my mom felt well enough to go on their trip to Kona for a golf tournament with the group. And it was the week after I landed in Honolulu. So I took a little flight over and got to spend 3 days with all of them, but 3 days with my mom. And, her face was all swollen from the steroids, and she was struggling, but she had the time of her life. We saw whales. They golfed. We sat out on the lanai and had drinks at sunset. We went and did the Atlantis submarine little tour and went down and got to see all the stuff down in the ocean. We went shopping. We just did all the things. And that is the first and only vacation I've ever had with both my mom and my dad, even though they were different partners. But that was my first vacation with my 2 parents. And none of that would have happened if my ship hadn't broken down and we had gone straight to Hawaii, we would have left 2 days later and been gone by the time they went there. Like all these things kept aligning to allow me to be where I needed to be at the right time and intersect with the people I needed to intersect with, right? And when we left, again, said our final goodbyes just in case. And then we set sail and we went off to we went to Guam. And as soon as we got the ship secured, I ran up to the commissary and called, and my mom answered. So we had a talk, said our final goodbyes. Then it happened again in Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, it had been my longest, it was like 10 days, longest period of time of not having communication. And I remember we were doing quarters in the morning, and as soon as quarters was over, they came and grabbed me and they said, we just got a emergency Red Cross message via satellite. However, it's got blank spots. It's got holes in it. It's from your mom. We don't actually know what it means. So they let me read it. And it said, my prognosis, blank. Not sure how much time left, blank. I'm like, all the things. So you couldn't tell which direction this message was going. Was she still here, or was she on her deathbed, or we didn't know. And what I did know is that she had gotten into some UW clinical trials. And one was where they used to radiate your entire head if you had brain tumors. Well, she had that done already, and it killed her ability to sweat. Your ability to sweat is what regulates your temperature in your body. It keeps you from having a heat stroke. And so she'd gotten into this new clinical study, and I didn't really know much about it, but they were going to do targeted laser focus on the tumor itself. And I think they called it gamma rays. And so I didn't know, what did this mean? Like, did it damage her more? Was time short? So I got that message, and we still were out to sea for another week. So for a week, I was just sick to my stomach. I had just this knot. I just didn't know. And we finally landed in Sri Lanka. Took 2 agonizing hours to secure the ship. And then finally, me and 6 others who also had important messages back home got in a van, and we were driven 2 hours to the American embassy. And I remember on that drive, we passed a man and a woman standing next to a tree, and in the tree was a piece of corrugated metal propped, kind of wedged up in the branches, and that was their roof, and that was their home.
Oh.
And they were standing there with a very, very skinny cow with its ribs showing. And they were probably Hindu, and cows were sacred. But I just remember the cow was so skinny, but I just remember that corrugated metal. That was their home. You know, there you could see some pots and pans and things. And as we were driving through Sri Lanka, and we got to the embassy and had to go through a whole bomb inspection and everything first. And then we got into the embassy, and I just remember my heart beating in my mouth. And I almost wanted to pass out, because if somebody answered that phone and said that mom had passed, I didn't even know what I was going to do. And the phone rang, and the phone rang, and the phone rang, and then the phone picked up, and it was my mom. And I fell to the ground, just sobbing. And she said, "Did you get my message?" And I said, "Yes, but we didn't know what it meant, because there were so many blank spots, so many holes." She goes, "Oh, the message is that this clinical trial of where they radiate just the tumor and not your head, focal point radiation, it shrunk. 6 of the tumors are gone, and the last 2 are tiny little small pea size. So now my prognosis, they don't much longer than the 2 months that they said. So now we don't know. We don't know." And I couldn't, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. But the range of emotions that I'd gone through, right? And so my mom lived 4 years and 2 months to the day that they said she had 2 months.
Wow.
I actually got out of the military 1 year early. When you talk about systems and inequities and all of these different things, women fought for the right to vote. Women fought for the right to be treated equally. Women fought for the right to be in the military and to serve. And on board my ship with 1,100 people, 800 were men, 300 women on my first ship. On my second ship, I was on an oiler. It was a USNS ship. And on that oiler, we had staterooms, and the staterooms were connected by bathrooms that were shared between two individuals in those staterooms. And there were 118 merchant mariners, merchant marines on the board the ship, and then 26 of us military. And of us 26 military, my chain of command above me was an ET1, a first class petty officer, then a lieutenant junior grade, and then a senior master chief, who happened to be from Whidbey Island. And that first class petty officer, that ET1, started to stalk me. And we were in Sasebo, Japan, and I would be, on board ship. He was just too friendly, just really made me uncomfortable. Always in my space, always looking for ways to be intersecting with me, all of this. And then, to make matters worse, he was engaged to the girl in the stateroom next to me.
Oh no.
And those bathrooms could connect, right? And so I started to notice, like, I could smell cologne in my stateroom. I'd come in, I'd smell cologne. My stuff was messed with and not in the right places. My bed would look rumpled, like somebody had laid on it. My underwear drawer, my bra would be out, just stuff. So I started locking everything, and I wasn't 100% sure who it was at that point. But then I was out at a club, and I felt like somebody was staring at me. And I looked around, and he was sitting in a corner just watching me, arms crossed, just watching me. Then I was at a restaurant, and he was outside the window watching me. And so then I knew he was the one that was doing this. And so I reported him to my lieutenant junior grade and my senior master chief. The next day, that first class petty officer was made master at arms on board ship. So he was the security person.
Yes,
He had
yes.
the key to my stateroom. He had the key to my stateroom. And it only got worse. So this went on for about a month, and I was seriously considering going AWOL at that point. I didn't know who to turn to. I had no protection. My chain of command failed me, all male. And we pulled back into Guam again, secured the ship, and I ran up to the commissary again, and I called home, and my mom answered, and I just burst into tears. She goes, "Oh, did you just get my message?" And I said, and it stopped me. I go, "What message?" She goes, "You didn't get my message?" And I go, "What message?" And she goes, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Beside that, Mom, what message?" And she goes, "We just sent an American Red Cross message to your ship 30 minutes ago. I'm going in for double craniotomy in 48 hours, and we need you home." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, there's new technology, new advances in science. They're actually going to go in and remove two of the biggest tumors, buying me even more time." And I was like, "Okay, I got to go." She goes, "Why were you crying?" I said, "No time for that. I'll tell you when I get home." Hung up, ran back to the ship, grabbed 3 of my friends. They helped me. Everything was in 2 boxes in 40 minutes. My whole room packed up, everything in those 2 boxes, sealed, addressed, everything. Wrote up the chit, looked up, how could I do this? Looked up medical hardship. You can have a medical hardship. They can't deny you if there's a legitimate medical reason for somebody that needs care back at home. And so I took it to the lieutenant junior grade, and I said, respectfully request to go home on a medical hardship now. This is why. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about that. No problem. We will pick you up in 45 days in Hong Kong. How does that sound?" And I said, "No, I think I'm just going to stay home and be with my mom." And he goes, "Petty Officer Woods, you know, you have to come back. So what, you need longer time? What, 60 days? He goes, at that point, we won't be in Hong Kong. I said, no, I'm just going to go ahead and stay home. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the military now. He goes, it doesn't work that way. I said, I think it does. And here's why. And I don't know where this came from, but talk about like divine strength just poured over me. And I said, you know how I came to you because I was being sexually harassed and stalked? And what did you do? Oh, that's right. You gave him the key to my stateroom. Yeah, oh, you're wanting to get out of the military in 3 months and senior chief is due to retire in 18 months. Yeah, so you can't deny my medical hardship. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to San Francisco and catch my connecting flight. But when I land in California, I'm going to call a press conference and I'm going to go ahead and let everybody know just exactly how the military works, specifically the Navy. And I'm pretty sure they're not going to look too kindly on it because tailhook had just happened on the main, where all those naval officers were busted with, sex workers in their rooms in Las Vegas. And I said, yeah, I don't think that's going to go very well for you. And it'll probably delay your getting out. Cause he was this preppy, had gone to, officers school, had never actually, yeah. So one of those, and he just looked at me and like the cartoons, when the steam comes out the ears, he just stared at me and he just wrote his signature and he just threw it at me and he goes, good luck to your mom. I'm like, thank you. Bye. And I left on a commercial flight. Didn't even try to get the jump seat thing. Commercial flight. My friends paid for the ticket, got home in time for my mom's surgery. And 6 weeks later, my boxes showed up at the door and I was given an honorable discharge from the military. And I spent the last 14 months of my mom's life with her. And, again, if I had not been stalked and harassed, I wouldn't have been out early. Right. So everything lined up. So when it came to the time of going through houselessness, the first time was horrible, but the second time I was so angry. I was mad at God. I'm like, I don't understand. I don't get it. What did I not learn the first time? Or what lesson are you trying to teach me? I don't get this. Clearly heard a voice. I was crying on the phone with my friend. I'd pulled over. I was so upset. I just was yelling. And at that moment, when I said, I don't understand why this is happening to us again. I've done everything I know how to do as a parent to protect my child. And here we are again. And this voice came in my head. This isn't about you. This is about Darian. And my son had been struggling with substance use disorder at that time. He, at that time, was 18 and kind of still not taking things seriously, not really taking accountability, still blaming others. And really just kind of blowing off the severity of the situation. And that is the point where I was just like, okay, this is the point where I need to set some really, really firm boundaries with him. I was unhoused at that time, couch surfing, and I had put in a request for a 1-bedroom Section 8 voucher, or excuse me, a 2-bedroom Section 8 voucher. And I was on my way up to Everett to drop it off at the housing authority. And I heard again, after hearing a commercial on the radio about obedience, something about obedience. And I just heard this voice, this is for Darian. And I pulled over and I changed the request from the 2-bedroom to a 1-bedroom. And I had been unhoused for 6 months at that point, 6.5 months. And the vouchers expire after a certain period of time. And I'd already gone past that expiration date and got an extension, but they told me there's so few options out there. It doesn't make sense to do a second extension. So we're just going to give you one, but you're gonna have to work really hard to try to find a place in your county because they only are for your county. And I changed it and I was just like, I don't understand this, but I'm going to trust this process and trust that this is for Darian's benefit. And I changed it and I went and I handed it in. And the following week, my friend called me and she goes, I just saw this apartment advertised. It's in Edmonds. Give it a call. So I called and I left a message. and nobody returned the call. So I called again a couple days later, and I called a third time a couple days after that. And on May 6th is when I got a call back from this woman. And she said, we had 52 calls about this apartment. Yours was not the first call, but something told me to call you back. You're my first call back from the list of 52 people. And I was just like, okay. And the whole time I'm thinking, if she says we don't accept Section 8 vouchers, I'm just going to lose it. So we go through this list of questions. She's interviewing me. And then she said something about your source of income. And I said, I'm on disability, Social Security disability. And she goes on to the next question. She stops. She goes, wait, does that mean you're on a Section 8 voucher? And my breath, my heartbeat caught. And I said, yes. She goes, oh, great. We take those. We love those. Those are wonderful. And we have an elevator in the building. So if mobility is an issue for you, we've got a great, community in our building. So you'll just fit in just great. And I'm just like, I cannot believe out of 52 other callers that are also looking for an apartment, she chose me to call back first. And I got the apartment on that day. And it's because I asked for a 1-bedroom. They didn't have a 2-bedroom. Those are the first things that go.
Yeah.
And it forced my son to take accountability. It forced him to take a hard look at his choices and to accept the help that was being offered to him. And I got him into the juvenile drug court program, and took a while, but then he went into treatment, and it took a couple of times in treatment, but he finally got it together and got the help that he needed and the right support, and understood that his substance use was the direct symptom of the hurt and trauma he'd gone through as a younger child. Like I said, now today he's adulting, and he's doing it beautifully. In fact, he's the one that picked me up from the airport last night at 10:30 at night on a Friday, not out at the clubs or out with friends. He gotten off of work and was done door dashing after his regular day job and came and picked mom up. And so, everything, I hate that expression, everything happens for a reason, but it does have meaning.
Yes. And it's beautiful on the way that you've actually looked at the adversity in your life and found the lessons within it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when people, even for myself, it's like, oh, why is this happening to me again? Without looking at, wait a minute, what lesson is this teaching me? And there's been lots of lessons. It's like with being sick with my kidney. So now I only have one kidney, and that kidney is not doing too well either. But it's stable. Okay. It was at the point where I needed to go, I've been to all of the testing at UW and all of the appointments and, a lot of testing. And they said if my kidney dropped below a certain percent, that I would have to go through dialysis first, wait for the kidney, and then I would have to have a transplant. Well, I left my job. I started to exercise a lot more. So I exercise between 5 to 7 times a week. I go to Pilates. I'm eating differently. I actually do breath work, a lot of breath work. And it's funny because I'm a trainer, a certified trainer with the Institute of Heart Math. And with Heart Math, it talks about resilience. It talks about breath work. And I intellectualized it for a very long time because I did this probably like in 2013, 2014. I intellectualized it until I needed to use it myself.
Right? Yeah.
Until I started to use it myself. And then I found the benefits in that, because when you are stressed out so much, you have all of that cortisol, all of that hormones that is just pumping through your bloodstream, and it affects every single organ in your body. And I'm like, what am I doing? I need to practice what I'm preaching. I need to practice this. So I stepped away from Heart Math for a long time, and then I came back to it. And now I'm going to start doing more training because I know the benefit personally
Yeah.
in what it does. And we live in a society, you and I have been through it, that is stressful. That if we don't find ourselves in this place of resilience and the capacity to shift in the middle of adversity, we can find ourselves in that place where it's easy to turn to drugs, to be pissed off at the world, to be angry about every single thing, where we're going to be losing the lessons that is happening in our life.
Yeah.
And so it's like finding that balance. And, you know, I tell people all the time, I said, I'm still angry. I'm still angry about the injustices and the inequities that is happening in our country, because it is blatant in your face. You cannot deny that.
Right.
I'm still angry about that. But I call it gracious anger, that I still need to have the grace for myself and for other individuals who are ignorant to the fact that the systems that they're upholding, they don't even know.
Right.
They don't even know.
Right.
So how do you meet people in the middle with AloHā? So that way you can actually have the voice to change the systems that are inequitable. And Mindy, that's what you've been doing. That's what you've been doing. And you have done an amazing job. And listening to your story, and you know, it's like a lot of times when people hear the word AloHā, they think about hello and goodbye and love and grace and empathy, which it means all of that. But when we look at the word alo and ha, alo is forward facing front, and ha is breath of life. So when we are engaging in dialogue, and we are in the place where we are exchanging knowledge, and we are actually dealing with conflict in a way where it transforms the other individual that we're talking to, just like what you're doing, going out and talking to people, and with the city, and advocating for others, you are sharing AloHā. You're sharing AloHā. You're sharing that breath of life, and you are sharing that spirit of AloHā, that grace and that compassion and that empathy and that gracious anger as well too. And so it's like, I am so honored to have had this time to talk with you and share these stories, sharing this AloHā with me. And I'm hoping that, you know, when people find themselves in this place where they feel that the world is against them, that they will stop and pause and breathe and ask themselves, what lessons am I learning here? Instead of looking at it to where, why is the world against me? And you really shown on how we can change that narrative within ourselves, so we can give ourselves AloHā as well too. So yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I always say, you know, I can be bitter or I can be better.
Yep.
And how do I get better? Well, it's what was the lesson out of that experience, or what can I glean from going through that then not only helps me get better, but then how do I then transform that into my community or into an individual? How do I speak life into an individual, or how do I help to lift up my community? And it's exactly what you just said. So
absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Edmonds is lucky to have you. The people is lucky to have you. And, you know, knowing that you're out there doing the work gives me hope that this world can definitely be a better place. And we can find this place where we can give each other AloHā and see the humanity in one another. We can do it.
yes,
We can do it. And I'm excited to share this podcast. And so Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You've been listening to the Evolution of AloHā podcast, a Plowline production. So tune in for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Evolution of AloHā and the Plowline podcast as well, too, available on all popular podcast platforms. And this is the Evolution of AloHā. I'm Jerry Balarosa Tanel, and thank you so much for being here with us, Mindy, and aloha, everyone. And we will talk to you again soon. So, ahui ho.
Thank you.